Chad, are we all set? You're muted. Chad, you're muted. Okay, we're all set.
Can I begin?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to the July 9th special meeting of the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. And we have quite a few participants today, so I will do my best as far as trying to acknowledge people when they wish to speak. Chad, if you could call the roll call, please. Chad may be muted.
I'll go ahead and do the roll call.
Thank you, Heather.
Yep. Peter Dewan,
Present.
James Croom,
Present.
George Lahanas,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens,
Present.
Greg Ballline,
Present.
Luke Hackney,
Present.
Mike Kruger,
Oh, here.
Ruben Levinson,
Present.
Jeff Smith.
Here.
All right.
We may have another new member. Is Kristen with us this morning?
No, she is not.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome all the board members that are participating. Before I move into the agenda of our meeting, I'd like to, we didn't get an opportunity to do this at our last DDA meeting, but I would like to acknowledge the contributions that Lindsay Clayton made to the city. She served a number of terms on the Planning Commission and 2 terms on the Downtown Development Authority Board. So I want to thank Lindsay. I'm sorry I can't do that in person with her, but I want to publicly acknowledge the hard work that she put into the service on the DDA and her advocacy on behalf of businesses. We do have 2 new members to the DDA that I would like to welcome, Kristen Clark and Ruben Levinson. So welcome to the DDA. We look forward to working with you. We have an agenda that's been presented by staff. I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
Luke Hackney, I'll make that motion.
Been approved by Luke, seconded by Aaron. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is passed unanimously. As we have done at all DDA meetings, we allow the public to participate in our conversation in an effort to try and make certain that the meetings are run smoothly. We do have a recommendation to have a certain time allotted for public comment, which is 2 minutes per individual. So I will make the motion in order to maintain the order of our online public meeting. I move to adopt a rule pursuant to MCL 15.263, limiting public comment at this meeting to 2 minutes per individual, and ask for a second.
Second.
It's been seconded by Luke. All those in favor of that? I'm sorry. Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
I'd like to propose an amendment to 5 minutes.
Okay. Is there a second for Mayor Pro Tem's
Greg
motion?
Ballline support. Greg Ballline support.
Seconded by Greg.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I have not been on the DDA or BRA. The mayor's been taking that over for the past few meetings, but I did this in the city council, and I think that 2 minutes generally is just too little time to talk about, I think, some of the complex issues that we discuss. And so generally, most of the commissions that I'm on, I advocate for it to be extended to 5 minutes, because in other
Okay.
cities like Lansing, oh, go ahead. No, I was just going to say in other cities like Lansing, where they actually do have a time limit of regular meetings.
So we
they're
have a
5 minutes.
motion that's been offered. Okay. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens. So we have a motion by the Mayor Pro Tem. It's been seconded by Greg Ballline. All those in support of extending the time limit for public comment to 5 minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, that amendment has been adopted. We do have the minutes from our February 20th meeting. Are there any changes to our minutes? Hearing none, I offer a motion to approve the minutes as presented by Luke Hackney, supported by Dewan. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, the minutes from the February 20th meeting are approved unanimously. In our packets, we have written communications and email from B. Schupak. We also have an email and attachments from Alice Drager. And I believe there were some additional attachments that came from the developer yesterday afternoon. Heather, was that correct?
There was, yes, is it part of the business item? There was an attachment added. Then we also received an email from Emma Lensky, and that's been added also.
Okay. Thank you. I don't believe there's any additional written communications. We'll move on to communications from the audience. And staff can help acknowledge people that may be in the queue wishing to address the Brownfield Authority. So I'll turn that over to Chad.
Actually, I'll be doing it, Heather.
Okay, I'm sorry, Heather.
That's okay. We have 3 attendees. The first attendee, the last 3 digits of your number is 100. You will be unmuted and you have 5 minutes to speak. 00, you are unmuted. Would you like to speak? Okay, we'll move on to the next caller. Next caller, ending in 963. You're going to be unmuted and you will have 5 minutes to speak.
Hi, Heather, thanks. This is Alice Drager from 621 Sunset Lane. I've been following this bond for a long time, and when it was first taken out, one of the questions I asked was how the interest was going to be paid before the tax increment started to run. And what I was told is that there was enough money in the bond fund to actually cover the interest. So I'm confused about why there is $335,000 of interest that is not being paid out of a bond reserve. So speaking to that, I want you to ask 3 major questions before you take action on this. And I think for this reason, you're going to need to defer action. First, what exactly has been paid out of this bond? I don't find in the provisions to the BRA information on exactly what has been paid. And I think it's incredibly important that you find out exactly what's been paid out of this bond already. Secondly, you need to find out what's left in the bond reserve fund, if there is anything left, because it's very important to know how much money is available still from this bond. And the third issue is what is owed on this bond exactly, because I could not figure out from the materials exactly what is owed at this point in time. So you need to find out what has been paid, what is left, and what is owed. Mr. Danoff is basically asking you for a $7 million wiggle room. And that's about 30% on the original bond in addition to the original bond. That's an enormous amount of wiggle room, and I don't think you should do that without knowing exactly why you're being asked to consider a bond that could be $33.5 million. You really need to figure out exactly what's going to happen with this money. That's your fiduciary responsibility to the people of East Lansing who are already under crushing debt. As far as I can tell, what's going on here is that there's going to be a move to pay more of the developer's expenses that are eligible under the TIF. As I read section 406, and I've run it past a couple of lawyers, you don't have to do that. You can do it. You're allowed to do it, but you don't have to do it. And the reason not to do it is because if you don't do it, you don't have to pay interest. That is, the people of East Lansing don't essentially have to pay interest out of that TIF for all of those years. That's why I think $1 million turns into $8 million, because we're paying all of that interest. So this is a great concern, is to figure out exactly what's going on and to resist paying anything more than you absolutely have to. It's important to understand the TIF plan obligates us to pay up to $56 million. It doesn't mean you have to pay out $56 million in the taxes. And so if you can put off paying the developer's expenses, more of the eligible expenses, until the end of the principal and interest, which I read section 406 and these other lawyers read section 406 as saying that you can put that off, paying that till the end of the principal and the interest. That will save us an enormous amount in interest, and it could save us a lot of money, millions of dollars in taxes. So as I said in my letter to you, I think it's important that you specifically instruct your bond counsel and your staff to do 5 things. First, issue a bond for the lowest possible amount necessary to meet the minimum legal obligations to the BRA. Keep the bond as small as possible. It will save us the most money. Second, do not pay the developers or the investors' lawyers or financial advisors. Pay only our side's representation and pay only the lowest amount necessary to obtain that representation. Third, obtain the lowest possible interest rate and undertake all necessary measures to obtain the lowest possible interest rate. Get it as low as possible. Again, it'll save us the most tax money possible. Fourth, open up the bond to a public offering so that all have an equal chance and so that we can find out what's going on exactly in the public realm. And fifth, and most importantly, again, do not pay out of the new bond any additional eligible expenses under the TIF plan if you don't have to, and I don't believe you have to. So be very careful about this, please. This is a lot of money, and we could save literally millions of dollars that can be used for other things like pensions and infrastructure and fixing this parking garage when it, like everything else, is going to need fixing at the end of these 30 years or 40 years. So please pay careful attention to this. Again, the TIF plan does not obligate us to pay $56 million. It obligates us to pay up to $56 million, but we don't have to pay out that full amount. And I think what you're going to hear is, well, the money's there anyway and the developer is paying it, but we don't get to have back our tax money that we pay into the system. There's an understanding that we don't get our tax money directly back. They don't have to get their tax money directly back. We can take more care and be really careful with this in the spirit that the council set out. The council never intended
30-second
for this
warning.
TIF.
Excuse me, 30-second warning.
Thank you. The council never intended this TIF to pay private development expenses, but that's already happened out of this TIF, and that's one of the things I want you to understand that's happened with this bond. Thank you very much, and thanks, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, for allowing a 5-minute comment. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Heather, are there additional callers? You're muted, Heather.
Sorry. Okay, next caller ending in last 3 digits of 974. You will be unmuted and you'll have 5 minutes to speak. 974, you are unmuted.
I think that's me, Vic Loomis, and I'm just listening.
Okay. One more caller, last 3 digits, 004. You will be unmuted and then you can speak for 5 minutes. 004, you are unmuted. Would you like to speak? Okay. All right, that's it, Peter.
Okay, thank you. We will close the public comment portion of our meeting. Move on to item 4, our business agenda. Consideration of a resolution authorizing the issuance and delivery of limited obligation tax increment revenue refunding bonds. And
Peter, sorry to interrupt,
Yep.
Greg Ballwine.
yes,
If somebody could make a motion to recuse me at this point, that would be appropriate.
Luke Hackney, I'll go ahead.
very good. It's been moved by Luke, supported by Dewan, to recuse Ballwine from participation in this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all
Aye.
very much. Thank you very much. I'll be stepping out.
Any opposed? Seeing none, Greg has been recused from our meeting, this portion of the meeting. Tom, are you going to be providing a introduction of what we're going to be considering today?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair Dewan. So before you is an issue relative to the Center City project. In 2017, the city, the Brownfield Authority, and the Downtown Development Authority entered into a development agreement regarding the project that anticipated the issuance of a $24.4 million bond for eligible project costs related to the public infrastructure and the public garage. During that time period, there was a concern regarding a guarantee for the project being built. We were demolishing our Lot 1 surface lot, and the city was concerned that if the project demoed the lot and then did not move forward, we wanted assurances that we could either move forward to put the lot back in its current or in its previous configuration or build the structure. Ultimately, the solution that was agreed to was that these bonds would be fully funded and give the city the authority to use the monies and assume the contract for the garage to finish it if the developer failed or otherwise walked away from the project. So that money, the $24.4 million plus the cost of issuance, was the subject of the first bond issue. The proceeds that paid for the eligible costs were escrowed and essentially accrued interest, which would relate to the $335,000 number that the staff memo suggests. There's also, I think, some accrued interest on the debt side that we can speak to as well. This bond issuance was essentially construction financing. The intent was to allow the staff to draw down upon the bond proceeds to pay for the construction costs as the project developed and underwent construction. And the development agreement anticipated two things. One, that the refunding of the construction financing after the project was complete would occur, and the tax values were established at that point by the assessor. And that establishment of those taxable values would have a response by the market with anticipated more favorable rates. The second thing the development agreement anticipated was that the project could be more expensive than $24.4 million to complete to the city standards. So the city agreed to use the interest on the escrowed bonds, the proceeds, the escrow bond proceeds to pay for additional project costs, and the developer agreed to fund any remaining overages that the project would incur. The city at that point also agreed in the development agreement that the developer could be reimbursed for the overages, any overages, if the bonds are paid off and there was time left on the 30-year time horizon of the Brownfield plans with interest. The project was essentially completed in May, May of this year, at which point staff asked Miller Canfield, who was our bond counsel for the 2017 issuance, to explain the process to the BRA that we would expect to go through. We were provided with a memo from Miller Canfield in May, which we provided to the Brownfield Authority, and it is part of your packet today. Also, just to note, the total project costs overall at the end of the project is approximately $25.547 million, of which the Brownfield Authority used the $24.4 million that was part of the proceeds from the bonds, as well as the interests on the escrow account of $335,000. The developer, true to the development agreement, funded the additional overages of $822,000. This is illuminated in your packet as an attachment. It's the final budget tracking and lien waiver That's provided with some detail just to show you all those expenses. The developers requested that the Brownfield Authority now start the process to refund the bonds. Step one today is that the Brownfield Authority would need to set the parameters for how a deal can potentially be structured, and that is part of today's request. Along with the Brownfield limitations and maximum eligible activities and interest, this resolution in front of you also establishes the constraints within which any deal must be framed. Step two would be that then the financial experts would approach the market with these constraints and try to find potential buyers to negotiate a potential refunding. Step three would then be the final documents would need to be drafted based on that deal structure and ultimately approved by the Brownfield Authority. The resolution as drafted would effectively set the parameters within which a refunding could occur and authorizes the officers of the Brownfield Authority to execute the final documents upon the review of staff and the Brownfield Authority's legal counsel. After some discussions with our council and with some board members, staff's aware that the Brownfield Authority may wish to consider amending the resolution to instead bring the final documents back to the full board for approval and we have drafted an alternate motion to that effect. If you so desire, we can pull it up for you. I would ask that our bond counsel speak to the pros and cons of either approach to help inform the board of your decision. Also, there's been significant interest in the array of deal structures that might be possible and why the parameters established allow for a seemingly high issuance and interest amounts, which I'd also ask our bond counsel and the development team to speak to. Also, I'd ask that our experts give an explanation as to the types of marketing approaches expected for the bonds. Lastly, if the bond counsel can explain the potential split between taxable and tax-exempt issuances, I think that would also be helpful for the Brownfield's consideration. The development team is present on the call here, and they have their representations as well. They've asked to give a presentation and have included some items in your packet for reference, which we can pull up at the appropriate time. I've asked, at this point, with the chair's blessing, I'd like to ask that BRA counsel speak and fill in any of the gaps I may have missed, and also please speak to the questions that I've raised here, and then if we could then allow the developer to make their presentation, and then open to board member questions, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So yes, I think that makes appropriate sense as far as hearing from all parties. So if bond counsel could supplement what Mr. Fehrenbach has just provided to the board.
I'd be happy to. This is Bill Danoff, if you can hear me.
Yes, Bill. Welcome.
Thank you. Also, Ron Liscombe, I believe Katrina Desmond is also on, also from Miller Canfield, part of the team working on this. Tom did an excellent job in describing the project and where we've come from 2017. And I would, first of all, want to say, and I'll say it a few times, these bonds are not an obligation of the city. They're not a full faith and credit obligation of the city. They are payable solely and only from the tax increments. Those increments secure the bonds. So their obligation of the city and of your authority is simply to turn over the appropriate increments to the bond holders. And we have made that very clear in the resolution. It'll be very clear. And that's what's being recommended here with sophisticated purchasers, as say banks or other sophisticated investors, because these bonds are not rated. They cannot be sold to the public, only can be sold to sophisticated investors. And we would get from them a certificate that they are appropriate sophisticated investors.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, did you have a question of Mr. Danhoff?
I just wanted to point out that I think his video cut out for a little
Oh.
bit, and I think we missed part of his explanation.
Okay, sorry. Let me just try again. Let's say the bonds are not full faith or credit of the city. They will be sold only to sophisticated bond purchasers, and we will get the appropriate certificates from them regarding the fact that the bonds are not rated. There's no official statement. There's no offering document related to this bond deal. The bonds will be issued in an amount sufficient to pay the outstanding 2017 bonds, plus interest accrued on that, plus the costs related to doing the this new bond issue, cost issuance, and any additional other costs that the board would approve relative to the things that Tom has indicated regarding cost overruns and changes. The actual resolution itself authorizes the amount of $33,500,000. I don't think that was a parameter we were given. I think it will be substantially less than that because, again, we're going to be limited to paying the outstanding bonds plus accrued interest plus costs plus, at these additional amounts that you may or may not approve. The resolution also authorizes the issuance of these bonds on a tax-exempt basis. And we would expect maybe a little less than half of these based on our analysis could be done on a tax-exempt basis. That is, the interest is tax-exempt to the holder. And we would be giving our opinion, Miller Canfield's opinion, to you relative to that component and as to the whole transaction. But we will make that determination, our tax people will, and we'll give you our opinion that we believe that portion is tax exempt. That should mean on that portion that the interest rate's even lower than the taxable piece. And I would say the 2017 bonds were all issued as taxable bonds. None of them were issued as tax exempt because we're simply unable at the time to make a decision necessary to as to what would be taxable and what would be tax exempt. And as Tom stated, this resolution, unless it's otherwise amended, is self-executing and authorizing within the parameters the officers of the authority to proceed to sell and deliver bonds within the parameters of this resolution. And again, if that's not the board's desire and you wish to have a second meeting, that certainly is up to you, and that would be a fairly simple, modification of resolution. So that is, I think, trying to keep this real simple. The bonds again are being refunded. There's not full faith or credit of the city, and by say under state law they could have been, but this has always been done as a revenue deal, payable just from tax increments. And here we're the 17 bonds in my mind I would look at as construction loan. And what we're looking at now is the takeout, because we couldn't do it until the project was completed, built, and you knew what the tax increments are, and we knew what was tax exempt component of this, so we could make that determination. So if there's other questions, that's the overview of the resolution. I think you have it in front of you. If there's specific questions on any part of that, I'd be happy to answer those, but that's what we're presenting today for your consideration.
Mr. Danhoff, I have a question, and I don't know if you're the appropriate person to respond to it, but the construction financing interest is at what percent?
I believe the bond accrued at 5%.
And speculative, what would we be able to anticipate in the marketplace presently?
Hopefully something less than that. That's determined by the purchasers, but maybe the responsibility to market these bonds is not yours or mine. Consistent with the 2017 deal, the developer and their financial team are responsible for putting together a packet to market these bonds and bring it back to you as an authority. It's not your job or my job to market the bonds like we would do with a full faith of credit bond issue. So maybe they would like to comment on what they think the interest rate might be on a takeout bond issue. And I assume there'd be two rates, a taxable and tax exempt rate, but I'd like to defer to the financial people if I could, please.
Okay.
I would request that we, if it's going to be those types of questions that we present, the information we have, and then address some of those questions, because I think there's going to be some overlap in regards to the questions, and we'll be able to answer that through our presentation.
Oh, okay, thank you. Any specific questions for Mr. Danhoff? Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, you're muted.
I was just wondering, so I think you touched on it just very briefly, but why are the bonds unrated?
This type of bond issue traditionally does not obtain a rating. If there were full faith of credit pledge of the city, it would be rated at the city's rating. In my experience, this type of bond issue, when we do this, revenue bonds are sold on an unrated basis. If it's possible to get a rating, I'm not aware of that, but if the ones we've seen, we just closed Red Cedar, that was all done on an unrated basis. This one was done unrated to begin with. I don't know that there's possible to get a rating, and you get a rating, if it's a junk rating, it doesn't help you. You need an investment grade rating in order to market bonds. And I don't know that you get an investment grade rating on this type of a bond issue. But again, I would defer to the financial folks who deal with this. We're more on the legal side, and I defer that question, like what is the interest rate, to the financial folks.
Thank you, Mr. Danhoff. Let's go on to the presentation from the developers. Is that Steve?
Yep, that'd be me. Thank you, Chair. Steve Wilby, I'm with Harbor Bay. I'm joined by Mark Bell, our CEO. I'm also joined by Brian Leffler, who's with Barrett. He's a financial advisor. He's worked in a lot of different capacities over the years, and we're fortunate to have him on our team, as well as Jared Smith and Jim Kiefer with Dykema. So we're really proud of the team that we have in partnership with the City's Council, Miller Canfield. But before I jump into the particulars of this, I just want to say, take a moment to really touch on the fact that we accomplished something really special. This process started back in 2016, 2017, and started before then with Mark Bell and the Ballheim family to see what the potential of this site was and what it could become today. And as we moved forward through the process and we began to pursue the Brownfield plan and so forth, a lot of you that are on this call, as well as just being citizens of the community, were a big part of that. And what we've been able to accomplish is a public-private partnership that has received a lot of national attention. It's received a lot of phone calls and questions about how did you do that? How with all the components and variables were you able to attract the first small format target into the state of Michigan, as well as Jolly Pumpkin and Barrio and so forth. So I think we need to just really, because this is the first time we've come together with this board, is just take a moment to recognize what we've accomplished and to really, on our behalf, say thank you for all the work, because I know from every department in the city, as well as some of the board members, there's just been a lot of effort, and there's also been a lot of creativity in overcoming challenges that you just are expected to really face on this. So I'm proud of that. I think we're all proud of that. And we included a development summary to really show the many facets of what the project is and what has been accomplished. In regards to the resolution that's before you today, we would request that the resolution is presented in its original form without the amendment, and we can touch on the amendment and the impacts that following the presentation. I'd have Brian Leffler and Jared Smith and Jim Kiefer speak to that at the end. But in regards to where we're at and what we really got us today, so in 2017, the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, as well as the City Council, supported a master development agreement and the Brownfield Plan number 24. Within that those two agreements, approved the process that we would be working under. It also approved the $55.9 million in tax increment revenues. And today, as it may have been stated elsewhere, we're requesting no additional funds. We're requesting no additional funds whatsoever. We're operating under the existing Brownfield plan. We're operating under the existing agreement as was envisioned. What we're asking for and what we're requesting is simply a refinancing of the bond obligation that was previously approved. And what was stated previously, and I know Bill had mentioned it, but the limited obligation bond, this is not a general obligation bond. This is solely a limited obligation bond that's dependent upon the development and the revenue that's generated from that development. So as part of the process back in 2017, and Tom mentioned it, it was originally envisioned that this was going to be a drawdown structure. But based on the concerns of some of the council members as well as the board, it was asked to go from a draw structure to an actual full draw into an escrow account. And that's what occurred. So when that draw occurred, it was for $25.2 million. And Tom stated 24.3 of that was related to eligible activities. And then the remainder was for issuance costs. And when that was issued, that bond was put in place at a term of 30 years at 5% interest. So that's currently, the financing that we're talking about. Currently, the project is financed. Although, the statement was used, it's been envisioned as construction finance. It's currently in place with a bondholder at 5% interest for 30 years on this project. So, what we're seeking and what we're talking through today is simply a refinancing of that to lower the obligation for the taxpayer. So it's not to unduly enrich the developer. It's simply to find a lower way to do the cost of financing the same way you would if you were financing your home or other personal obligations. So during the course of construction, when we did this project, it was originally envisioned that would be around $24.3 million for the parking structure. And as we went through the process, working very closely with the city team, change orders arose to address design matters, issues, pipe protections, and just overall improvements to the quality of the project, really setting forth a new standard of parking within the city of East Lansing. It was something that was done, some of the change orders were, items we could talk through very easily. Some were very difficult and required a lot of contemplation on our part, whether or not it was something that was, and we always were able to work together to find a solution to that. So the overage that we realized in regards to the change orders was around $1.1 million, as Tom stated, and then $335,000 from the escrow account interest that was accrued on that pre-draw amount was used to offset that overage and resulted in an equity contribution by Harbor Bay of $822,000. And that was for city approved eligible activities. So when this project was put in place, what's always been the vision, we understand it. We're not disputing it, questioning it, or saying it wasn't the fact that any additional overages that were paid by the developer would come at the back end of we'll say the waterfall. So you'd have the bond obligation at the city, whether it be a series of taxable, tax exempt, and then you would have the obligation. But that also within the document, it states that obligation would accrue 5% interest annually. So when we talk about this and we look at the solutions that we're presenting, we could stay the status quo if it was the intent of our team to maximize the return on this from a standpoint of interest. It would be simply to leave the bond in place. And that's not what we're asking for. What we're asking for is to refinance the bond to get a lower interest rate, to accelerate the repayment period and lower the interest to the overall taxpayer without changing the only change that's really being discussed would be whether or not to incorporate the 822 into the bond issuance, which there is a savings. So through the work of our team, Brian Loeffler and Dykema, they began to look at ways, what are solutions, what can be accomplished. So within the packet that you received, there's a diagram that looks like this. It's the one that was sent over yesterday afternoon. So within that document, if you have it before you, it shows the three scenarios. The red bar, that is what I'd refer to as the status quo. That is the actual what it is today with the 2017 issuance at the 5% interest, 30-year term, as well as us being in a position to capture the 822 on the back end. So under that scenario, as approved, this bond is in place. You're using, as was stated earlier in public comment, you are using the entire amount, the entire $55.9 million. So then what the second scenario would be the scenario where you have the taxable tax exempt bond. And then at the end, you would have the $822,000 being repaid to the developer with the accrued interest at 5%. So when you start taking into account $822,000 and you're accruing interest on that over 5% until the payoff period in around 27 years from now, 28 years from now, what you're looking at is you're generating around $2.7 million in interest. So what the developer, our team, would receive at the end of that waterfall would be the $822,000 plus an additional 2.7 in interest, assuming that there's enough tax revenue at the end of that to repay it. So from a standpoint of these two scenarios, there's, from a financial interest or benefit that would exist within one of these two scenarios. But in the effort, because we are a part of this community, we have made an investment. It's the intent of our team going into projects that these are long-term holds. We're looking at the longer, bigger picture on these types of projects. So working with Dykema and working with Baird, they developed another solution. They said, yes, per the development agreement, you have an opportunity to have that long-term obligation at 5%, but based on market conditions, you can consolidate that into the taxable and tax exempt scenarios that were discussed. And I'll let Brian Loeffler in a second speak on the actual terms of what he anticipates the interest being on those scenarios. But when you look at that, you see the actual change in the amounts from the red amount, yellow and green, where you're getting to a point is that you're realizing $5.4 million in savings, as well as you're reducing the payment period by 2 years. So I think it's, as we go into this, is all we're simply requesting is a refinancing of debt that's currently been agreed to by the BRA board to finance it at a lower rate. We're not asking for any additional funds. We're not asking for any changes. If it's the intent of the board to say we're going to stay by what was initially agreed to, and you're looking at the yellow scenario, that's you're completely your right as a board. But when we talk about what we think is an opportunity to lower the overall cost, it's the green scenario. And as I stated, you're looking at a reduction around $5.4 million. So our intent today is simply to request support of the resolution. We are proud of what we've done, and we take the use of taxpayer resources very seriously. And through the process, I think it would be a concern not to address something that's been stated. When we went through the process and the use of the funds we requested from the escrow account, those were based on 25 separate draws that were submitted and had questions associated with them, reviewed and so forth. So it was not something that the fox was watching over the hen house. It was done in a partnership with the city by our team, our construction team, as well as Crispin Construction, which is a reputable firm, submitting information and packets to the city for review prior to the draws. So there's been a very clear structured process from day one on this. And it's something that we've worked on very diligently with the city. And what we're simply requesting is a refinancing of the debt that's currently out there. So that's the comments that I would make specific to that. But I would like to really jump into the question that was raised in regards to, it would be aligned with the charts that were provided, is what the assumptions are behind those. So if I could ask Brian Loeffler to just speak to that, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Brian?
Good afternoon. So in terms of the chart, there's three, I'm going to refer to each scenario as the color of the bar, just so that people are clear. With the red bar, the scenario is that the interest rate on that is the 5%. as Steve Willoughby had mentioned. In the yellow scenario, what we were looking at is an overall cost of about 4.25%, and that's taking the ratio of what would be taxable and what would be tax exempt. Mr. Danhoff mentioned that it would be about an even split. Right now, it's a little bit heavier on the tax exempt, and that's because the eligible activities, the improvements on Albert Street would essentially be 100% tax exempt. And this is something that the development team has been closely working with Miller Canfield's team, specifically Katrina Desmond, to be very clear of what would be taxable and tax exempt. Going down to the green bar, we had looked at essentially the 822 would be folded into the two tranches or two series of bonds, one taxable, one tax exempt, looking at essentially an all-in TIC of about 4%. And that's what's covering these scenarios. One of the things that we would also be looking at for these purchasers is that we know the cap of the amount of revenue, which is the 55.9 million. And we know over time, the amount of tax increment capture is going to deviate based on the assessor's change in the property value and the amount of taxes that are levied. Nonetheless, the 55.9 million is the cap. So if there was any excess in any year in each of these examples, we're trying to accelerate or repay these bonds as soon as possible. And for each of these scenarios, we use the same growth assumptions. And the same $55.9 million as the gross amount of dollars that are be available for capture tax increment revenues.
Thank you, Brian, for doing that. So when we were looking at this, it was really from a standpoint, as Brian stated, was looking at it to see what the quickest or accelerated pace could be to pay down the debt. So that's where the three scenarios are presented. So at this point, I would open if there's any other questions that we're happy to address those. As I stated, we have Dykema, our legal team on this, as well as Brian, who spoke, and then Mark Bell, our CEO. So if there's any other questions that want to be raised, or Mark, is there anything that you wanted to state?
Mark, you're muted. Mark, you're muted.
It looks like that's a mute from staff, actually.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the time today. I think maybe just to echo some of Steve's comments is, I really look at this as a celebration, the celebration of a public-private partnership where countless people came together. I mean, when I look back to this project and how many people at the city were involved, the thousands of construction jobs, union jobs that were created, hundreds of permanent jobs, best-in-class retailers. I look at Center City as a catalyst for future development, as a great test case, what can be done in East Lansing. The garage itself, again, remember, these bonds, these were done to finance and to build public infrastructure. So there's a great asset to the city of East Lansing and the taxpayers and the constituency in a state-of-the-art garage. This is the best garage in the city of East Lansing, better than the ones to the east, Division Street or Charles. This is the best. And it wasn't an easy process. I mean, when we had $1.1 million of cost change orders and scope gaps and different things, that was very difficult because, just to be clear, the first cure to that $1.1 million was the accrued interest in the escrow account by the fully funded bonds. Okay, so that was the first cure, was the $350,000 plus or minus. The 822, that's a tough pill for the developer to swallow. We're coming out of pocket to pay public infrastructure on, frankly, a lot of change orders and scope gaps that we disagreed with. But we're here as a partner to the city of East Lansing. We're here as a partner to the community of city of East Lansing. So in the interest of partnership, in the interest of stewardship, and to honor, obviously, our agreements, we came up with the 822. So, these are challenging deals. It's a $125 million project. I think there's a lot of pride. There's been endless amounts of community members that have come up to my team members and really thank them. But really, as I always say to my team members, this is not necessarily just Harbor Bay. This is a reflection of the community, because this is a community project. So I think that can't be said enough. Unfortunately, with COVID, right, we don't have the opportunity to see one another as often as we might have. So we're regulated to these Zoom meetings. But, you know, as I go back to what we're asking for today, is we have a tremendous opportunity to save the city of East Lansing taxpayers tremendous amounts of money. Take advantage of the market. The fixed income markets right now, as a result of COVID, there's a lot of bad things with COVID. But right now, where the U.S., where the Fed has interest rates, we can refinance these bonds at dramatically lower basis, on an interest rate basis. I mean, Red Cedar, I'm not sure if everyone read that report. Red Cedar was just refinanced at permanently financed under construction at 3.59%. So right now, the developer, through one of our entities and affiliates, is earning 5%. So the current trajectory right now is that we're going to be paid 5% all the way up to the $55.9 million. So we don't have necessarily any benefit to refinance these bonds other than to get our capital back and redeploy that with what we do. Frankly, the buyer of these bonds, and Bill Vanoff can opine on this, and so can Dykema, and so can R.W. Baird, is a PNC Bank or a Huntington Bank or someone that wants to earn that type of interest. And we use our capital elsewhere. But I can't say it enough. What we're proposing here today is an opportunity to pay back the bonds faster by 2 years, so that the taxes go back to the taxing jurisdictions and to the general fund of East Lansing. So in summary, this is a great opportunity. This is a celebration, in my opinion, of thousands of people that came together on a great project, one that we take great pride in. We thank you for your involvement. And I think if there's questions as far as how the math is, the beauty of this is the math is the math is the math. This is a fully assessed project via the assessor, David Lee. So all the math is baked. There is no question marks. And if we need to talk about that, we should talk about that. On the 822, we agree. The agreement right now says the developer doesn't get that money back, which is eligible expenses, until the very end, provided that there's additional increment at the very end to reimburse the developer on those change orders, right? We agree. But why would you want to do that at 5% when you have the ability to refinance it right now and save the taxpayers a lot of money on the interest and pay back the bonds quicker? So these are the simplicity of this deal is actually pretty beautiful. This was envisioned by the DRA. We knew in 2017 when we did this, we were going to refinance this. It's in the agreement. So this is not a new deal. This is the same deal, and we're at the very end of the project asking for the refinance, which is actually going to, because of the market conditions, save the city of East Lansing and its taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. Thank you.
Peter, can I ask a question? It's George.
Thank you. Yeah, George, go ahead, please.
So if I could just go back, and maybe it's Brian or Steve, the three color bars, all of them have the 800,000 of developer costs in there. It's just whether it's paid as a part of the bond and refinanced, or whether it's paid after the bond is paid off and paid straight out of TIF at the end of the rainbow. Is
Correct.
Can you go through that one more time just to make sure I've got that we all have that right?
Yep. Brian, you want to touch on that just for clarity's sake?
Sure. So on all three scenarios, the red, the yellow, and the green, is that the 822,000 would accrue interest at 5%. For the red and the yellow, the 822,000 would accrue interest at 5%. That interest would not be paid until after the bonds would be repaid. In other words, the 822,000 is just going to keep accruing interest. It's going to be what is viewed like a capital appreciation bonds based on the legal interpretation that Dykema provided to us. And so just essentially a strict holding of the strict interpretation of the documents. So again, George, this is essentially where the bonds would be paid first. In the red bar, the 2017s would be repaid, and then the 822. In the yellow, the refunding bonds would be paid, and then the 822 plus accrued interest. On the green side, what we're doing here is rather than that 822 being accrue interest at a 5%, it would accrue interest at the amount of the taxable or the tax exempt interest rate, and it would become part of one of the two series of bonds that would be offered, taxable or tax exempt.
Thank you.
Peter, in that regard, I had a question, Jim Croom.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Could we have our counsel just verify that the documents would allow the 5% charge on the 822 until the end? Bill or someone from Miller Canfield?
Hi, this is Ron Liscombe. Yes, under the development agreement, the developer equity put in does accrue at 5% interest.
Okay, thank you.
This is Jeff Smith. Peter, if I may.
Go ahead, Jeff. Thank you.
A couple things, actually. I would love to know what the growth assumptions are over the term, having been involved in a direct line of sight for a TIF development project in 2008. The growth assumptions during a economic crisis are sometimes a little askew. I do realize that the BRA would not, or the council would not be on the hook for any of the gap between what is assumed and what actually occurs, although that is a part of this discussion. Has Miller, I'm new to the BRA board, and I want to make sure to ask the right questions here on behalf of the residents. Cleared conflicts. Has Miller Canfield and Mr. Danhoff cleared conflicts between work that they're doing on behalf of the developer and work they're doing on behalf of the city?
We are not doing any work for the developer.
In any way related to this
There's no
issue?
conflict. There's no, we have no working relationship with Miller Canfield. I don't know where that was stated, but it's simply not true.
I just want to make sure to ask the question so it's on record. And then lastly, I feel like this is a little bit of a rush. I don't feel like we have all the information we need to make a decision. The project was completed in May, more than substantial completion, but completion in May. The request for this meeting came in June, and now we're hearing it. So from my perspective, I don't know that I'm ready to vote on an item today, but I do feel like this is poignant given the interest that is in favor of both the city and the developer. But I want to make sure that we try not to rush into this as much as we can, given that the change in the interest rate is probably not going to go against our favor in the very near term. I just want to make sure to point that out.
Can I just ask a quick question, Peter, on that point from Jeff? Aren't we being asked to approve them going to market, and then they would come back, and then we would have a final approval? So this is the first of two steps. Is that correct from staff?
Tom?
Yeah, so essentially what you're approving today would be the resolution that sets the parameters for how a deal could be put together. Then the financial folks would go to the market with those parameters and try to structure a deal and find a buyer. And then they would need to return to the Brownfield Authority for approval. And that could either happen as the resolution is written. The approval could happen by the officers of the Brownfield Authority, or the Brownfield Authority could decide that it would prefer to have the board as a whole decide on that matter.
I, for one, would prefer that it come back to the whole board. That's my view on it. So I hope people would agree with that because it's a very important issue and I think we should have another chance to see it fully baked. So that
Can
would
we
be my
speak to that? Can Brian Leffler and Dykema speak
hold
to
on.
that?
Hold on a second. I'm going to try and take people in the order in which I'm seeing their hands raised. And there are certain limitations because I can't see everyone on the screen, but I did see that Brian wanted to weigh in and then I believe Mark Bell. So Brian.
Sure, thank you very much. Mr. Smith, I wanted to answer your question about what was the growth assumptions that was utilized in the Brownfield plan and then also in these numbers. We projected, utilized a 1.5% annual growth. So something that's clearly less than what was experienced here in the last couple of tax years for the city of East Lansing. The only thing that's different in this plan or this growth assumption is what is the initial value today in July 1 of 2020 is essentially 100% of the property is being assessed for the taxes. And then going forward, it's 1.5% thereafter. So I just wanted to make sure that we didn't use anything too strong.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Is the baseline then 2020, June 2020?
Yes, I mean, this is where we're going to be calculating what is the capture, if that's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. Thank you. The issue of this timing of coming back to the board, one of the things that we're experiencing is the same thing that was possibly even experienced on the Red Cedar transaction is that the process that we normally would utilize is that once you have the parameters set and authorized by the board, we are going to continue to need to utilize your staff's time to essentially talk to potential investors because there's going to be what is called due diligence. The city is going to, or i.e. in this case, the BRA staff is going to have to essentially sit down and answer questions for this and see the term sheets related to this transaction. And there's going to be that transparency during the discussions, and there's going to be more than one potential purchaser that's going to essentially have to need your time. With this time where we're seeing, I appreciate where you think the rates are where they're at, and but that's the crystal ball that none of us have. I know interest rates today are pretty close to where they are pre-COVID, and essentially where we were in February of 2020. My time horizon is seeing what's happening out here less than a month, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8. My concern is what's going to happen in 2021 or at the end of fourth quarter of 2020. I appreciate that. Interest rate may be low. However, there may be investors that decide to do something else or focus on other projects. So given the fact that the federal government has been very generous in opening up essentially their checkbook to help the liquidity crisis that happened in the month of March, I think we want to capitalize on that and essentially transfer that over here to the structures that we had proposed here, either in the yellow bar or in the green bar. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. I really want to caution about this idea of having to come back to the BRA to approve a refinancing for a couple of reasons. Number one, that is highly irregular in the bond market. So what we would be asking is to go to purchasers of these bonds, big banks, pension funds, REITs, private equity firms, et cetera. We'd have to disclose to them, which is highly irregular, that they have to do all their due diligence, spend their time, and so on and so forth, but it's not guaranteed on a sale. So why would they spend time on that? They have a lot of muni bonds they can buy that don't have those parameters because that is highly irregular. So you're essentially handicapping the deal, creating less of a market, less of an appetite for these bonds, thus less competitive environment, and that will affect the interest rate if the sale at all. That's number one. Number two, I question what's the worst that can happen here? To confirm and to rehash, the current trajectory as articulated in the red bar maximizes the full $55.9 million. That's the road we're on. Bonds aren't getting paid back early, okay? And everything's going to accrue at 5%. If we do nothing, that's what we're doing. We can't exceed that 55.9 when we go off the open market, so it can only get better. So what is what is the point of going back to the BRA on a trajectory that the intent is to help the situation, pay back the bonds sooner via interest rates that are low, and we're questioning a process now that is going to be handicapped and thus will create poor confidence in the purchaser market?
If I may, can I respond to that real quick, Peter?
Jeff, go ahead.
With all due respect, I think we are in highly irregular times. I don't think it's unreasonable or irrational to come back to the board and ask for approval of a deal that's going to put the city of East Lansing on the hook for any amount of money. Coming off the heels of a rather large news clipping of an East Lansing developer being indicted on tax charges, I think it's extremely reasonable, without hyperbole, that we ask for an approval of any dollar amount that is going to put the city of East Lansing on the hook for a very long time to approve something that needs to be approved. I don't think that's unreasonable, irregular, or irrational in any way.
So let's go to Brian and then Steve and then Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Brian?
Yes, thank you very much. I think the issue here is the approval has already occurred in terms of the dollars that are going to essentially be pledged to the 2017 bonds or any reimbursement of other eligible activities. So essentially, that $55.9 million situation is already baked. It's done. What this team is actually asking for is to try to reduce that amount of $55.9 million for the transaction, and then look to not having this tax capture occur for the full 30 years, and then that the taxes that are being captured for not only the city of East Lansing, but other jurisdictions stop paying for this project and essentially go back to the individual taxing entities that had essentially having their taxes captured. So it's not only the city of East Lansing that we're trying to assist, it's the county of Ingham, it's any other jurisdiction. It's actually the state of Michigan, who has also allowed the capture of 6 mills and the 18 mills, which impact essentially the school aid fund. I mean, it's a host of partners that did this project back in 2017. So what we're always asking is that, given this, I'm going to call it the sandbox, the authorizing resolution, is that, and I want to repeat what Mr. Danhoff said, is that we can't bond for anything more than it is legally known. And that all we're trying to do is do it at a cost cheaper. And so that less taxes are captured over the 30-year period. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Steve or Mark?
Steve Willoughby, thank you. So what Jeff stated was definitely worth further discussion, and something I do want to touch on. Brian shared from a financial commitment. That commitment was made with the approval of the Brownfield plan, as well as further committed to with the issuance of the 2017 bonds. So that fiscal decision had already been made. In regards to what we're requesting, we're not requesting that there not be BRA participation. We're not requesting that at all, nor are we opposed to it. The resolution that's been presented just simply puts in place that we, as Brian stated, we're setting up the sandbox. We're allowing the financial advisors as well as our legal counsel to get the deal, to market, determine what's available. Then they would work with the, chair, vice chair in regards to executing the appropriate documents, and the documents are actually completed, and we have someone that's went through the underwriting process and is committed to buy those bonds. I look at this very simply from a standpoint, if I was going to buy a home and I was interested in the home, I wanted to move on that home, and then it said contingent upon the seller finding a new property, or contingent upon the seller moving out within 6 months, it makes that home very less appealing. It makes it very less marketable. So we're not opposed. I want to be very clear. We're not opposed to the BRA's participation on this. We're not opposed to working together. We're just requesting that there's not that one last step that would be not typical in these types of deals. And I would turn, if I'm misstating that, then I would ask Dykema or Miller Canfield or even Baird to opine on whether or not that's a typical condition that is placed upon bonds that are currently in the market. If we're wrong on that, then so be it. But it's our understanding that's not the case. That this would be an atypical item in compared to what currently gets offered.
If I may,
I want to acknowledge Jim, and then I have some questions. Jim, go ahead.
Sure, Jim Kiefer from Dykema. Clearly, the BRA board has the authority to request the transaction come back to it a second time for approval. But as Steve said, that is very atypical. It'd be highly unusual. I've been serving as bond counsel for over 35 years at Dykema. Bill Danoff has been doing that longer at Miller Canfield. There are a few occasions where an issuer will request that, but the vast majority of bond transactions are approved with parameters such as the ones that are set forth before you today, and then a requirement for the authorized officers to finalize the final terms of the documents. In transactions like this that are so complex, it's even more important to have that flexibility with the final purchaser to be able to act quickly once they're ready to buy the bonds and to go forward with it. So the authority has that option to come back and meet again, but I think it's highly unusual for a transaction like this.
I have some questions that I don't really know who's appropriate to respond, but it seems to me that we really need to go back to the resolution that's before us and talk in terms of the parameters that have been set, what has been proposed as an alternative, and then talk in terms of setting the ground rules. I mean, what do we have in the resolution itself that's protecting the city? What's protecting, us as far as making certain that we're trying to get the best deal possible? And it would seem to me that since we are authorizing, the board is authorizing the ability to go out to the marketplace, that would dictate to the marketplace that we want more favorable terms. So why would that be considered unusual for whatever favorable terms come back for the full board to be able to act on those? I guess I don't really understand that quite thoroughly. And whoever, again, someone that has the expertise that can be prepared to respond to those types of questions.
This is Bill Danoff. We have drafted the resolution in such a way that the authorized officers are, if adopted, are authorized to proceed to effectuate this refunding if it makes sense. And that on a refunding scenario is I think almost exclusively what we've done for many years, and that is, if it makes sense to refund the deal, you're authorized to do it, because otherwise, the offer might come in today and it's good for 24, 48 hours. And so a purchase agreement typically is got not a long window on it because people want to lock in rates. So when we deal with refundings, it's more common, much more common to say you're authorized to sell this within the parameters. Obviously, you don't sell them if you don't have savings. That wouldn't make any sense. And so that, and you're not borrowing any more money, as was stated a couple times ago, necessary to repay the outstanding bonds. Plus, if you're going to add in the 822, that is within the parameters of resolution should you want to do that. But again, the board could meet, but you'd have to be able to meet quickly to adopt a sale resolution on an offer that may be very time sensitive and may not be as good if you have to wait. So again, that's why we, on refunding bonds, draft the resolutions this way to make them self-executing, and your officers are authorized to proceed to to sell the bonds if you have the type of savings that, or reduction in term, however you want to look at it, that Brian outlined.
Brian, did you want to speak as well?
Yeah, just one point is the pivot that, as Mr. Danoff is saying, is that a lot of investors, I don't want to have a situation where if they can't get action, they tend to build in what is called a risk premium, that's not going to happen or it's going to be delayed, because as the market changes from day to day, they may add something to the deal, because the investors are fearful that it's going to go up or get worse on their side, and then they're going to pass that cost, i.e. a form of higher interest rate to you, which then tries to diminish the projected savings that we're showing. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there additional questions of board members? Additional comments? Mark Bell.
Yeah, I just want to add and remind everyone that again, this is not a new deal. And when we first started this voyage 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it was, Lori Mullins was involved, Tim Dempsey, friends from the past. We cut an agreement, and in that agreement, in the MDA, it says that it is the intent of the developer and the city via the BRA to refinance the bonds by June of 2020. It's right in there. So I just want to remind everyone that we're not here today with a radically different idea or perspective or what have you. This was the intent of all the sides to proceed forward in good faith to refinance the bonds. Now, if I may, after that comment, I want to go back to Mr. Smith, please. This idea that the city's on the hook, can we expound on that? These, to be clear, these are limited obligation bonds and will continue to be limited obligation bonds. Okay. Again, the current trajectory is to max out the 55.9 because the interest rate is so high. To go out to the open market, and as Mr. Danhoff and Mr. Leffler said, I mean, who knows? We're speculating a little bit, right? But I think they said that there is a risk that the open market is going to respond negatively, that says there's an offering memorandum that has a verbiage in there that says this is kind of a deal, but it's still subject to municipal approval. If you're a bond underwriter, you're saying, I got a lot of muni bonds coming across my desk. Why would I spend time on this one when I can go buy bonds over here? So I'm just trying to understand, for my benefit, for everyone's benefit, what is the risk here for the city?
So quick response. My point wasn't that the city was put at a further risk or potentially put at a further risk. In fact, I mentioned that I understand that there's no additional obligation other than what we've already agreed to. My point is, you're still going to need to have city approval, regardless of its officers or board, when you go out and you ask for that refinancing, and whoever's going to buy that bond, it is still subject to city approval, regardless of which side you get those signatures from. I don't deny that this is a great deal, great opportunity, and great timing. I don't deny that at all. I just want to make sure that when we go out to the market and when we're representing the city, that we're representing it accurately, and that the benefit goes to both parties, or however that shakes out, that it isn't putting or encumbering the city in any way in a worse off situation than we currently are. Anticipate, and again, I'm ensuring, so I don't know who just asked that question. I'm ensuring that that is the case, and that we don't come back in 3 months and say, man, we just screwed over the residents of East Lansing somehow for the next 30 years. in a time when we actually need to be as fiscally conservative as possible, I want to make sure we don't do something that's going to put us at risk. That's my insurance.
So I agree with that. And I also just want to say, this is George, that we could have this meeting scheduled in 2.5 to 3 days from the point that you tell us you're ready to go. We need an 18-hour notice and can get a quorum. It just strikes me that that's not much longer than it would take to get signatures from our officers and have them review it. So it just seems like that's not a long period of time, with how quickly we can do that.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I wanted to hear from staff a little bit on this. I think we've been going back and forth between the developers and some of the members of the DDA. So Tom Fehrenbach, would you mind kind of explaining your reasoning behind the new proposed motion resolution and you know, and actually, George, I was just about to make that exact same comment. I heard that the you know, if it bill is a 24-hour, 48-hour, you know, sunset period on it, and you know, we've done meetings, not necessarily the BRA, but I've been in meetings where, you know, you notice it and you're having it, you know, within a day. And I know that we can do that. So Tom, would you mind answering that for me?
Sure. So, I mean, essentially, you know, we're trying to queue up the Brownfield Authority to make the best decision possible. And in discussions with our council and with some of the leadership of the DDA and BRA, it came to light that there may be the desire to have the issuance come back to the full board for approval. So we simply created an alternate motion for your consideration.
So Peter, if you don't mind me stating something after that, is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I'd look to other DDA members specifically to get their interest, not interest in that. If they agree with some of the points being made by the developers, if they agree with some of the points by F or other members of the DDA, I'm looking to other DDA members because this is other BRA members, because I'm just trying to get a sense of where members' heads are at before we go forward with a vote on it.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens. I want to acknowledge, Steve, it looks like you had your hand raised.
Yes, I did. Just before, I think these are great points, and I want to echo Jeff Smith's concern, you know, fiscally doing the right thing. That's not our intent. You know, although Harbor Bay may be out of Northbrook, Illinois, you know, we have a large investment within the city of East Lansing that makes us a big part of the downtown. So I want to echo, we share in that commitment to do the fiscally responsible thing. And I think Mayor Pro Tem Stevens' questions is a great question to ask. But prior to that question being asked, I just wanted to get a clear understanding from the professionals. We don't do the bond financing ourselves. You know, the same way we don't do a number of things. We rely on the Bairds, we rely on the Dykemas, we rely on Miller Canfield to do that. So when I heard Mr. Danhoff state that this would be highly irregular, I just want to make sure that with what City Manager Elhanis proposed, where you do the 18 hours of public notice, and then it takes a day or two. So you're really looking at potentially 3 days to do that, if that would impact the deal, because that's what we're really concerned about, is how it impacts the deal. So I'd ask that question to see, you know, what the professionals that do these on a day in and day out basis, you know, would that scenario work or not work? That would be my question.
Jared? Go ahead, Jared.
Thank you. And I thank you for the time. I know the board has a lot of faces coming at them today, making a request and trying to be persuasive, especially on this one meeting topic. The question was just posed with respect to 2 days. That's absolutely right. 18 hours for notice for a public meeting. We understand that as well. In some instances that might work with a purchaser, but we just completed yesterday, in fact, a $255 million bond deal for Detroit Public Schools that was privately placed, and which means it didn't go out for a public sale with an official statement, much like we're talking about here. That was placed with JP Morgan Chase Bank, a very significant bank. The day we locked those rates, we were required to provide signatures. They will not, in that example, and that's fairly frequent They will not hold those rates even overnight. So there is a potential risk there. So I at least wanted to surface that, which required their authorized officers to sign their sale orders same day, or they'll reset the rates the next morning. That could go up, that could go down. So the only other thing I can offer is the parameters, as well as your representation very well by Miller Canfield. They'll document this transaction all along the way. Their fiduciary duty is to you as the board to make sure this maintains and makes sense for the DDA or for the BRA, with the number one parameter being savings. State law requires that there be a savings in order to authorize these bonds to be refunded. So surrounded by a variety of parameters that make this only work if it benefits you. I'll stop there. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Mark Bell?
Thank you. I'm confused, and this is a really healthy conversation. It's okay to be confused, and so good thing we've got experts on the phone. What would be, give me an example, please, on a refinance, and Jared just cited Michigan's statute that says that we can only do this refinance if it benefits the city, but there seems to be perception or concern that you obviously have you have a fiduciary responsibility to the city of East Lansing and its residents. Agreed. What bad scenario can happen by authorizing a refinance today? Could someone give me an example?
So I'd like to see fees and costs for what this all issuance, attorney's fees. I want to see all that this next time. I want to see it all up front before authorizing anything. So that's an example.
Okay.
I would equate it to refinancing your house. Let's say you were refinancing your house right now. You had $150,000 in equity in that house. You could either refinance for the full amount, including the equity, or you could refinance based on how much you actually owe. The difference could be a significant amount of money in this case. Do we maximize and refinance for the total dollar amount we could possibly refinance for? Or do we refinance for the amount we owe, saving us a fair amount of money, relatively speaking? That's a case.
Brian, go ahead.
So as it relates to cost of issuance, that can certainly be done. Certainly in developing a model, we're going to need the cost of issuance from expenses that the city or the Brownfield would have. So for example, the fees of Miller Canfield, if there's anything else through the BRA that would need to be known. Mr. Smith, as it relates to the example that you said that you had an equity in here, what on a refinancing here, the only amounts that is going to be in the quote proceeds is to pay off what's owed on the 2017 bonds to the date of closing. So that's the principal amount and whatever interest has accrued. The second thing is the consideration of the $822,000. And then the third thing, as Mr. Lahinus wants to know, is what are the costs of issuance? That can all be done as before there is a closing, and that can be circulated. I'm actually wanting to know what those costs of issuance are. I actually been reaching out to make sure that we know what those are so that it's in this model so that we can actually tell the potential purchaser what those are so that they know that up front as well. So it's to some extent the interest is aligned, but there is no new money being extracted. There's no quote equity that's going to be pulled out of this cash flow. We're not going to, our goal is not to quote securitize the full 55.9 million. All we know is these three components: 2017, the 2017 bonds, the 822, and then cost of issuance. And the 822 is an eligible activity. So that's there's no.
Thank you. That clears it up quite a bit for me. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Are there additional comments or questions?
Can I,
Peter,
this is
Mr.
Mark.
Bell,
Can I
and
say
Mr.
one more thing,
Kruger
please?
have their hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to.
Mark.
Okay, thank you. I'll be brief here. I know I want to be cognizant of people's time and thank you for everyone's time. Just to be clear, if I understood things correctly, Dykema, Miller Canfield, and R.W. Baird, the experts on the call, which I am not an expert in this subject matter, said that there will be a premium, could be a premium on interest rate tied to this approach, just to be clear.
Thank you.
Peter, this is Jim Krim. Peter?
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I guess I'll speak as one of the, 2 or 3 people that under this resolution would be responsible for signing. I think I get and understand that in the market, there really could be a premium that is attached to this by investors, so that ultimately, if you look at it, the citizens of East Lansing could potentially lose in terms of having a higher interest rate on the bond. It may also affect the ability to market it, is what I've heard in my experience, that so that the pool of interested parties, according to what the experts are telling us on this call, might be diminished. And that lack of a full pool of competition may also drive the interest rate up. So I think, just based on my experience, those are valid comments. I don't mean to, I think they are valid, and I'm buying them. As one of the 2 or 3 people that would sign, I want to make sure there's an appetite by the entire board that happen. And if there is some concern about having 2 or 3 people make the final decision on this, and it's worth trading off the risk that we're not going to get as good an interest rate, then I think that's what the board has to decide. I originally, in thinking about this, said, oh man, do I want to be one of the 3 people that's going to put their name on this and decide it? And if I were, I would certainly undertake to communicate with all the board members. I'm not going to do it out there in a vacuum. And I would certainly want to ask more questions about the drafted resolution. Like, why does the interest rate have to allow us to approve up to 8%? And why does it have to allow us to approve a bond issuance amount that could be $8 million higher than what the actual payoff needs to be? So I'd have to hear about that. So while I guess what I'm saying is I'm willing to shoulder that responsibility, I don't know that there's the appetite for it on the board. I'd be happy to vote yes if we tightened up the resolution and undertake that responsibility, but maybe we just have to be maybe we just have to go with the gut feeling of the majority of the board members and have it come back to the whole board. As the Mayor Pro Tem suggested, I'd like to hear from other board members on that.
For myself, I share a lot of the similar comments that Jim just made. I clearly don't want to impede our ability to get the most successful deal. I respect the comments that have been offered by the people that do this for a living, and I don't want to throw up any unnecessary obstacles or roadblocks. And I understand at the end of the day, ultimately what will be coming before us will be more favorable than what we have presently. So I'm cognizant of that as well. I would be inclined, if the full board extended that confidence in the officers, to go ahead and act in the best interest of the board. But there's a lot to be said about having the full board ultimately making the final decision. So that's essentially where I'm at. And any other board members that wish to chime in, offer their comments would be helpful. I see Mayor Pro Tem Stevens and then Michael Kruger.
Yeah, so I really first, since we've got our on council on, Jim Krum just asked 2 questions in relation to the interest rate and the preliminary amount. Could we just get an answer to that? kind of reasoning behind it. And I see your hand there, and I'm gonna just look to our counsel for it.
Bill Danoff, if you want me to speak. The principal amount, as Brian said before, will only be the amount necessary to pay the cost to do the deal, to pay off the 2017 bonds and the 822, if that's what people decide that they want to put in it. That will be the total size of the deal. And so that's what would be approved with, and will be well within these parameters. The interest rate is well within the parameters. And again, when we do interest rate parameter resolutions, they tend to probably overstate the principal. Even for the city of East Lansing, we would often overstate the amount of money that might be necessary to refund an issue. Here, though, I can assure you it is not going to be $33 million. It'll be, whatever the 822 plus the cost of the bonds and the accrued interest on the bonds plus whatever the accrued cost issuance are. I think that's the total amount of the new bond principal.
Tom, Jim Kroom, when you and I talked, there was some with reference to the $8 million that's been thrown around above and beyond what the pure cost would be to refinance this, that somehow potential bondholders would want to have the bond be in a higher amount above the amount that Bill Danoff just described. So is that not the case anymore? And that would reduce our interest rate and so on? Is that not the case?
So my understanding, again, I'm not an expert on the subject, is that there are some structures that would put this together that may increase that, but I would really have to defer to Mr. Leffler or Mr. Danoff to explain how that could come about.
Can one of you speak to that?
Sure. This is Mr. Leffler. Some buyers in today's market have different appetites, so that when they make their investment, the interest rate that they put on the face value of the bond will meet their needs. And as what we're trying to do is give potential buyers the gamut of interest rate options. And as you know, if you give them what a buyer wants, they tend to pay a higher price. So as it relates to a transaction and we'll just say a $1 million bond issue, if today's market rate is 4%, there could be a buyer that says, you know what, I really would rather have a 3% interest rate on the face value of that $1 million. And what ends up happening is that when you sell that $1 million bond, you actually don't get $1 million in proceeds. You essentially only get $900,000 in proceeds, but you really need $1 million. So what ends up happening is that you actually sell 1.1 million of bonds at a 3% interest rate, and that's what is sold as at a discount. They're going to offer that or buy that bond at 3%, and that's going to meet their needs. The difference here is you would just compare the cash flow of a $1.1 million bond at 3% versus a $1 million bond at 4%. As long as that is a better deal for the city and this transaction, this parameter allows us to, meet that need of that potential investor. The reciprocal could be true as well. You may end up having a bondholder that may say, you know what, I'm sorry, on the 3% scenario, what they're driving at is they don't want you to refinance that bond. They want to lock in their investment for the 30-year period. And that's a function of where interest rates are at the time for refinancing. You may, on the other hand, you may have an investor that says, really, I want a 5% or 6%, but to get that higher coupon payment during the time of my bond, I will essentially pay you additional dollars. So that $1 million, you only issue in that case probably $700,000 at the 6%. The bottom line is that, as Mr. Danoff's saying, any of these mathematical options, we can only generate the proceeds that is necessary or authorized under this resolution, and that's for those three purposes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Michael Kruger, did you have a comment earlier?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I've been disconnected so many times trying to figure this out.
I was tend to echo a lot of Jeff Smith's comments from earlier, as well as Jim's, but with also the understanding of what Mark has stated about, being able to get sort of the timetable with which somebody purchasing these bonds really wants to get the deal done based on, the interest rates and whatnot. Is there anything that prohibits the BRA officers from seeing what essentially the costs of issuance are and making those public before we make that, or the officers make that final decision, if we're giving them the power to do so? Or because I also get that we don't necessarily want to have to bring this back to the full board just for time's sake as well. Is there any reason that wouldn't be made public beforehand?
Tom, can you speak to that? Tom Fehrenbach?
I'd have to ask the bond counsel and the financial advisor whether that's possible.
Well, certainly as the deal comes together, we certainly could share with you, and you could share with board members what the structure is, how the principal amount's being generated, as Brian just set forth. The amount of money we need to pay off the existing bond, we'll get a verification report on, and the cost of issuance Brian's trying to put together, and those will, get monitored. And I have no problem with board members or anybody in the board wanting to look at that stuff. I mean, it's ultimately all public anyway. Everything we do is going to be a public record. So.
This is Jeff real quick. We probably have enough information out there. Jared, you said you just did one just recently. We probably have enough information to make a quick estimate that, it's going to be some sort of plus or minus margin, but having a pretty good estimate, we can send that around to the officers. And, quite honestly, I'm completely fine with, moving forward without it coming back to the board from my perspective, as long as the officers feel like they feel comfortable making that decision and that they have enough information. I don't necessarily need to take it out of their hands if it's something they feel comfortable with.
Thank you. Are there other comments? Tom, can you speak to the alternate resolution that was drafted? I don't think we have seen
Certainly.
that.
Sure, and I would ask Heather to pull it up. But essentially what it does is authorizes this resolution, but removes the authorization for authorized officers, and instead would bring that back to the full board. So this is our draft language here. And maybe if you could zoom in a little bit, Heather, please.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I'd like to just read that. Is there a way to zoom in?
Yeah, bottom right. Yeah, or that way too. Yeah. And I'd want to make sure that the bond counsel was comfortable with this as an appropriate motion to give them what they need to make the changes to the resolution prior to its execution.
If that's the board's desire, I believe this works, and we can just put that in. We'll put it at the end of our existing resolution if that's what the board adopts.
This is subject to, I guess, legal interpretation. Do we have the authority for the board to give us the officers authorization? And I don't know what the time frame is as far as closing the deal. I guess my point is that the officers would have the authorization to prepare documents that then would be subsequently approved at an additional board meeting, or I need someone that has some legal expertise that can weigh in on.
This is Bill Danoff. I would read that to say that you're authorized to proceed to market and otherwise proceed to talk to purchasers, everything talked about, but you're not authorized to sign a purchase agreement until there's a board meeting.
So that doesn't address the items that have been raised by Mr. Bell and Baird and others. Go ahead, Tom.
I just wanted to state that, you know, if the board had some direction that they wanted to provide in terms of the cost of issuances or otherwise, you know, how the deal would be structured and the preferences therein, I think it would be appropriate for you to offer that advice to the folks today. For instance, the staff had made the request per conversations with BRA leadership that the developer's attorney's fees not be included in the cost of issuance.
Are there any board members that would like to offer comments?
So I support that. I think that if we're not going to come back and check this, I think that that's important, that there's not some fees that are unknown to us. So if there aren't any other issuance fees from the developer side, I think that I would have more comfort with it than having unknown fees. So I support that.
Okay, Mark?
Are Baird's fees going to be in there also? I know we don't want the developers' counsel's fees paid. Can someone?
The type of fees that would be included normally in these type of transactions would be Baird's fees. You would have Miller Canfield's fee. You would actually have the developer's attorney fees. A purchaser may actually ask you to pay for their attorney fees, or their fees, or the discount that they buy this at is going to be included as well. You're going to have fees related to the trustee, as you did before, maybe a security filing report fee. I don't, unless there's some amount of margin for miscellaneous. And then the other question is if there's anything else that has to be paid for the BRA, if there was any other internal cost, an upfront fee. Sometimes some authorities do that as well. So like, for example, the City of Lansing's BRA, when they closed Red Cedar, that authority essentially charged an issuance fee so they could cover some of their costs of their staff in times like this, because it does take a amount of time. So that's unless there's anything else, there's a policy fee, I don't know, or any other fees that we need to know, we would put them in. I think what's more important is that the transparency is what I think what you're driving at. Even during this process is that if the resolution is adopted as is, there's going to be a schedule of events. This is something that I think the city is actually seeing is a schedule of events. There's going to be flow of funds. There's going to be a lot of conversations that are going to be incorporating or utilizing the BRA staff time to essentially help get this refinancing done.
Thanks. This is Jim Kroom. That helps. But we need to, I feel as a member of the board, we need to have an explanation to the East Lansing citizens as to why it makes sense business-wise to pay either Baird's fees or the developers' counsel's fees. I know that we're saying it's customary, but can someone speak to why it's customary? What can we take back to our citizens that convinces them it's customary and convinces them that we should pay this? Maybe we shouldn't pay it at all. I think it's just putting it on your side of the table, right? It's just an extra cost for the developer if this isn't folded into the bond. So can someone speak to that? Why we should pay those two sets of fees?
Yeah. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we have to be very, very careful here. And these are excellent questions. Essentially, I think it's reasonable to ask this board, which is obviously an extension of the East Lansing community, to use good faith and reasonableness to transact, right? If the Detroit deal or the Lansing deal or all these different muni deals are profiled at X, and City of East Lansing wants to do something and deviate and go to Y, that dysfunction creates irregularities in the market and erodes confidence. So in any business, in any industry, there are transaction costs. If it is industry standard, in this instance, for the developer's fee, attorney's fees to not be included, then I would think we should not have them included. But if it's alternatively, based on the experiences of myself, Miller Canfield, Dykema, and R.W. Baird, that certain fees are part of the transaction, then they should be included. In other words, to the East Lansing community, they shouldn't get anything worse, they shouldn't get anything better, they should get whatever market is, right? And remember, take for instance, a origination fee. Many of you are astute and have seen these transactions. There could perhaps be a 1% origination fee. Sometimes it's as high as 2%. 1% on 30 million is 300,000. I think we have to remind ourselves is that, are we ready to take customary transaction fees in order to save the East Lansing community $5.4 million? That's the question, right? Now, this is just underwriting. It could be more than 5.4, it could be slightly less. But we've got a great comp in the Red Cedar at 3.59 that Huntington Bank just bought. And those transactions, these aren't easy transactions, right? This is a complex subject matter where we need bond counsel on both sides, and we need R.W. Baird. R.W. Baird, by the way, for those of you who don't know Brian, he's been in the community for 30 plus years, represents multiple cities, including on the state level. So he has professional licenses and he has a fiduciary responsibility. So we're all in this together. And I guess in summary on the fees, my suggestion is just to make them market, and don't let me comment on what market is. I would really, suggest that Mr. Danoff or Mr. Smith or Mr. Kiefer or Brian Leffler, please, what is market? What's Detroit seeing? What's Lansing doing? Because we're not asking for anything more than what market is.
All right, I'm going to jump in for a second quick. So my concern is that last time we did fees, the developer fees for attorneys were twice as high, I thought, as our attorney fees. So that to me is not acceptable. I think there's got to be some payback on that. So I think not having attorney fees from your side is fair, because I don't want you to get paid twice essentially for the same transaction. So I think they already got paid. Now it's the equity is to not have that. So that's my view of equity.
George, with all due respect, the architect of the documents on the front end were Dykema. Miller Canfield at $155,000 just reviewed the documents. Okay, so you're talking about who was the laboring oar behind the documents. We had to create all the documents, and those were major documents. So it is very reasonable, in my professional opinion and respectfully, that their fees were twice Miller Canfield's on the front end, because they were the architect of the document. Whoever's drafting the documents is going to have the higher fees.
I disagree. I think the closing costs on that side were higher. That's what I think. I think we were surprised by the closing costs, and I think I'm not willing to have them in again at that level without coming back to us. So that's my position. I'll be voting that way. The board can go which way they want on it, but I don't think the attorney fees should be back in there again.
Let's go to Steve and then Brian and then Mark. Go ahead, Steve. Steve, you're muted.
Sorry about that. No, I think it's important to note that we're talking about a true overall development that was accomplished together. So when we completed the asset with these bond proceeds, that asset, the parking structure, is not Harbor Bay's. It's now the city's asset. And then furthermore, the city generates lease payments from our use of the air rights as well as the land. And then they receive the revenue that's generated from the parking structure as well. So when we talk about the deal structure and additional legal fees that need to be incurred, the impression gets made that, the developer. So if you're talking about striking fees, I would say, although I'm not in support of this, then you strike the city's fees as well, because we're partners in this. We're all developers together, and we've completed the project together. Now you have a performing asset and we have performing assets. So there really seems to be this bifurcation of us as entities in public and private. When we're both at this point, we have assets that generate revenue. To the point of the actual cost, I look at this in a very simple way. from legal counsel needs to be involved on both sides to close a transaction. It'd just be the way if you're selling a house, going from a situation you're dealing with realtors, you may not like giving the realtor their commission, but it's something that you need to do because you're not the expert in that space. So when we talk about the issuance costs that were incurred on the front end and the costs that have been agreed to on the back end, we know from a standpoint of our legal fees, we're locked in at $75,000 or less is the fees. So you're talking about to do a transaction, a sizable transaction, they're about a third of what they were previously. So it's not unrealistic to ask these types of requests on these projects because you still do need their expertise to close these. So that's all I have to say.
Brian,
let me just add to that real quickly is that, I mean, George, I'm surprised to hear those comments. Look no differently than the 822 on city infrastructure, public infrastructure, in a process that was riddled with change orders and scope creep and different things that drove, quite frankly, a lot of our team members nuts. We came out of pocket $822,000 for the benefit of the city for public infrastructure. Now, I give that as perspective because now you're saying that you don't want the developer's attorney's fees to be part of a deal when every other deal is done that way in reasonable fashion. We're partners in this. When I met the Ballline family 7 years ago, our intent still today was to be stewards of this development. Look no differently. Go look at Lauren Osta, this muralist, a national award-winning muralist, is painting a great mural on the east side of that development right now. We're not fly by night. We don't exit this development. We're here to stay and do the right thing. And we've done the right thing for the city of East Lansing for the 3 years of this project. And to now get to the end and have to hear things like, well, you shouldn't have your attorney's fees included. I just don't understand that.
I'm not willing to have a blank check for attorney's fees. I'm not willing to say that I'm going to authorize it because I believe last time the fees were higher than we expected. So I think that's a fair statement. You can take it as you want. I think the fees are higher than we expected.
Our fees, just to address this, our contract and agreement with Miller Canfield is a contract of $75,000. We're not certain what was agreed to in regards to the legal fees between the city and Miller Canfield. I'd allow that for your team to address that. But we do then know you have Baird's fees that are associated with this, and those fees, ultimately serve both our interests. Baird is working to find the lowest possible interest rate. He has professional obligations that he does as well. So, really from a standpoint of what Baird does, I see it being a multifaceted service that's provided to both of us because he's providing the expertise that we rely on, and he's providing the expertise that you look at as well. So I really see from a standpoint of Miller Canfield fees are in line with that. It's much lower than was done on the first bond, and it's in line with what we're paying as well.
Thank you. Are there additional comments?
Yep. This is Mayor Pro Tem. You might have a comment here.
Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll leave the comments on attorney's fees, and I think the back and forth aside. I think what the city manager is trying to say is that regardless of reasoning behind what those fees are, he's not comfortable with approving that with the fees being unknown, with those extra fees being unknown. And I don't think that's, I guess, an unreasonable statement because we go back to the original conversation of, do we want to have a deal basically set out and it not come back to the BRA and have that level of, that level of faith and that level of trust in that. And I just think that, for transparency's sake or for any other sake, if the reasoning is I would rather have it come back to the BRA so I can be assured, I think that's the exact same reasoning the city manager was just using. So, I think that we've gone around a few times, and I just want to hear from DDA members, other people. If there's a motion on the table, I'd be happy to make a motion. But if there are other people that want to chime in, I just kind of want to know where we are at this point.
Are there other board members that wish to offer questions or share their opinions? And Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, if you'd like to make a motion, this certainly would be welcomed.
Could I see the,
yeah, Jeff Smith.
Can I just add one thing, please?
I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. To be clear, let's possibly agree to disagree. Okay. I don't want to extend this on much longer than it needs to be, but let's just run this out for a second. If you're asking to have a second or a final approval of the bonds, right? Okay, let's play that out. And the fee, the transaction costs seem to be a contentious issue. Fair? Okay. Then how can we have confidence to go out to the market? For instance, let's just say Huntington Bank wants to buy the bonds and they have a 1% origination fee. Is it going to be that the BRA says, well, we don't want to pay the 1% origination fee, so therefore the deal collapses? I mean, so where does this go as far as the realm of reasonableness to allow, again, the team, everyone involved here, everyone together right here, right now, to go to the open market to refinance these things for the benefit of the community? So what confidence do we have that we're going to be able to transact?
I got to have confidence in the job I do too, and that's to know what we're spending. That's it. That's the bottom line.
So are you suggesting a flat fee? I'm trying to that we get a guarantee on the fee now, so we know.
Can we do that? Because I would be in favor of that as well.
Ruben Levinson, I'd be in favor of that
Mark,
also.
If you want to agree to that, let's go ahead and let's ink that in stone.
The law firms can do that. They should be able to estimate, I'm thinking.
It appears that Jared Smith wants to weigh in. So Jared.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So for bond transactions, I think the fee's been stated already. In 2017, we worked with the city for over a year on the master development agreement and other documents. So certainly our fees were higher. We have a flat fee negotiated for this transaction that can be known now. And with respect to cost of issuance, absolutely. Those are always stated as part of any documents that anyone's going to sign.
Just very quickly, I don't think there's anything stopping the experts on the line right now from putting together a pro forma showing what the estimated cost, including fees, would be. Right now, showing a full table of estimated costs. I don't think there's anything stopping that group right now. I think that's what George is requesting, and I think it's fair to request is just let's put together something that's a reasonable estimate based on market conditions that we can all wrap our heads around and feel very comfortable with. We have plenty of very recent case studies to use as examples. And then we're not blindsided by anything if it's plus or minus the margin. The community is not blindsided. Everybody can feel very comfortable about it.
Go to Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
And just as a note, and I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know how long that would take. I mean, if we need to defer action on this and go to next week, right, have a meeting right next week. Again, I think the timetable that people were laying out was the idea of actually getting a deal and then going forward with it, not necessarily the approval of this. So if there are further questions that need to be answered from the BRA side, and if there's time needed to answer those questions, then we could defer action on this and hold another meeting at a different date. I just putting out there a suggestion. I'm not saying that's what we need to do. But
Brian, go ahead.
I can certainly give you where I have in terms of the ranges of my estimates and of this. So to answer your question to Mr. Smith in terms of, and this is going to exclude whatever fee the BRA has negotiated or has finalized with Miller Canfield. That is going to have to be on top of that. And then in addition to that is that I don't know what a potential purchaser's fee is going to be. And that usually comes into a bond purchase agreement, which I think most people understand that that's outside the realm. But in terms of fees, I think already, Dykem has already talked about a fixed fee of $75,000. Baird has offered a fixed fee of $90,000 on that. We're expecting a developer's fee in terms of this is $50,000, and that's related to refunding transactions of the underlying loans that they have. Huntington is going to, this is your trustee, gave us a fee quote of essentially $10,000. I assume that the state of Michigan is going to require a security report filing fee, which may be another $1,000. And so all those items, excluding purchaser's fee and Miller Canfield's fee, I think at the back of the napkin here was $229,000 was what I was putting into the number. And that's, it was kind of like, if you want to look at it as a cap, is essentially what I have right now. And the two bulks of that 229 was Baird's and Dykema's. And I can certainly commit as managing director here that I have the authority to do that right now. Put it in the resolution. I don't care. Let's get it done. So we got to start. Deferring of this is just, as I mentioned before, time is of the essence. We just got to keep doing it, because keep in mind, the 2017 is accruing 5% every day. So Tom or anybody, if you want to put an amendment to the resolution to give yourself some comfort, is that it's not to exceed $229,000 for those costs, excluding the purchaser fees and the Miller Canfield's fee, and that if there's anything, it has to go back to the board or through the authorized officer. And I think that's a good compromise to agree to disagree, and let's move forward.
Thank you. Brian, are there comments about Mr. Leffler's proposal?
Ruben Levinson, I'm new and I'm catching up on all this, but from everything I've heard, I would agree with what Mr. Leffler just said. I was going to comment just before him that if we could get that some sort of cap or fixed costs in the amendment, why wouldn't we move forward with this?
Thank you. Additional comments?
My proposal is not to accept the amendment, that this is the amendment, is the cap on fees, that you continue to move forward with the authorized officers driving that. Because I got the impression from Mr. Lehanis that his objections was the unknown cost of issuance. But as Mr. Danhoff already said, we already know the 2017 is a known amount as the day of closing, the 822. The third item is the cost of issuance. And the only variable is, in this going forward with is the purchaser's fee, which we will, certainly that's going to be, you're going to know that when the purchaser comes in, and then whatever fee the BRA negotiates with the Miller Canfield fee. So that's the type of amendment that I would be proposing, or you consider as your amendment, and that you don't come back to the board, because I think we're addressing the concerns that you may have.
George, do you have a comment?
If the rest of the board can live with the fee, I can live with it if it's a set number. That set number.
Okay. Other board members' comments about the proposed amendment? Jim?
Here, just as a point of clarification, there is no motion on the table right now. So if that amendment would be made.
No, it's what has been suggested by Mr. Leffler.
Is Jeff looking to jump in? Did you have anything, Jeff?
No, I agree with it. That's really an amendment to the resolution, not amendment to a motion, right?
Right.
I agree.
Well, then let's formalize that suggestion. As long as there's support, I will offer that we cap the fees at the prescribed amount that had been articulated by Mr. Leffler, and ask for a second. Is there a second?
Second. It's Jeff.
Jeff? Okay. I think we've talked. Go ahead, Tom.
Just a clarification. Are you making a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the issuance and delivery of the limited obligation tax increment revenue refunding bonds and establishing the BRA officers as authorized officers for purposes of approving final bond documents within the parameters set forth in the said resolution upon satisfactory completion of all the required documents as approved by the BRA Council, and then further stating that you are capping the fees at the amount stated of $75,000 for Dykema, $90,000 for Baird, $50,000 as a developer's fee, $10,000 as a trustee's fees, and I thought I heard some other smaller ancillary costs, and then costs relative to the BRA's council. Is that the motion that you've made?
Well, I recognize we have a procedural question, so we likely to take action on amending the resolution. We needed to have the motion initially to approve the resolution, and that what has been offered as far as what I proposed and was supported by Jeff was amending the resolution itself. So I can retract that motion and offer a motion to approve the resolution and ask for support, and then we can go ahead and amend it. Is that the appropriate process?
You could also just say the motion as presented by Fehrenbach, as read by staff. Support the motion supported by staff. All right, can we do that, Tom?
I'd ask City Attorney Yaden, but I believe we can do that in one motion.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do either way is proper.
So I'm sorry, Tom Yaden, can
Peter, Steve has his hand raised real quick.
Steve Willoughby?
I just want to be clear, the way I understand it, Tom stated it, you were amending the amendment. I believe the discussion has been that there's actually potentially two separate amendments to the resolution as presented. You have the resolution as written that would allow the executive officers to do this. Am I wrong on that, Tom?
No. Yeah, you're wrong on that. Essentially, they're moving they're moving the motion for consideration in the staff report, and then they're amending. They're adding additional amendment to that motion to speak to the fee caps.
Got it. Okay, just clarification. So it's separate. The other amendment that you read earlier, that would have to be a separate action outside of this.
Right. Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure.
I just want to make sure that, Tom, I just want to make sure you said that the 229,000 that I referenced excludes Miller Canfield and the purchasers, what they may have, because that will come to you in a bond purchase agreement. I just make sure everybody understands that. Correct? The 229.
We listed the fees out directly, I believe.
Yep. Sounds good. Thank you.
So it excludes Miller Canfield's fee, and it excludes what?
And the others.
The purchasers, like they may have a underwriting fee to sell the bonds to investors, internally. It's like as an origination fee, as Mr. Bell had mentioned.
Now that the motion is on the table, is that correct? Motion is on the table.
Someone has to make the
Yeah,
motion.
I think that's for the chair.
Yeah, well, the motion is on the table. We were just trying to get clarification of how it's appropriately presented. So, Tom, if you could provide clarity so everyone knows where we're at in the process and what has been proposed and seconded.
Certainly. I have one additional question from Mr. Leffler, and that is the small fees. You mentioned $1,000. Can you?
When you sell bonds in Michigan under Public Act 34, you may have a security report filing fee. So it's pursuant to the Michigan Department of Treasury, just in case, as a miscellaneous. But we can double check that. But it's just a nominal amount.
Okay. So if you'd like, Peter, I can restate the full motion.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. The motion is to move approval of the resolution authorizing the issuance and delivery of limited obligation tax increment revenue refunding bonds and establish the BRA officers as authorized officers for purposes of approving final bond documents within the parameters set forth in said resolution upon satisfactory completion of the required documents as approved by BRA council, and further limiting the cost of issuance fee to $75,000 for Dykema, $90,000 for Baird, $50,000 as the developer's fee, $10,000 as the trustee's fee, with the exclusion of some small miscellaneous fees, Miller Canfield's fees to the BRA, and the potential for a purchaser's underwriting fee.
Okay, and that was supported by Jeff, correct? Okay. Further discussion about the motion? See none.
This is Mayor Pro Tem. I do have discussion.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
I'd just like to say I was much more comfortable with the staff amendment. I mean, we can agree to disagree on this. If this goes forward, but I would much rather have this come back to the BRA as a whole so we could know what we were getting into and know the full scope of it. I'm not looking for a response from any of the folks on here on this. I'm just speaking to the DDA member or the BRA members, but I really do think that the staff approval where we have this come back to the BRA was where I was more comfortable with. But this is the motion on the table. So.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and address the amended resolution. And if Chad, you could take a roll call vote, please.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
Oh.
Groom.
Yes.
Dewan.
Yes.
Hackney. Hackney still with us?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Kruger.
Yes.
Lahanis.
Yes.
Levinson. Yes. Smith.
Jeff, you're muted.
Yes.
Okay. That motion passes 7-1.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, I have something. Jim Croom.
Yes, Joe.
So my thoughts are, so could it seems like if that's approved, we'll be responsible for some communication and for looking at the terms. We know some of the expenses now. In terms of the ultimate financial terms, Baird will be representing who on this? I know they represent the city in some capacities. They're representing the developer here. Do we need to have, is there an appetite for a separate financial advisor? Will that make, that is a fiduciary to the BRA to pass on this and to advise the officers before we sign? Is there an appetite, or are we planning to rely on Baird and what they're able to negotiate? Maybe Brian could talk about that first, Leffler.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I cannot, under the rules of our industry, you cannot rely on me having a fiduciary duty to the BRA. So that is that's a good point to make out. The BRA is certainly welcome to have a municipal advisor on your side in terms of reviewing the transactions and the different term sheets. But that would also have to be another cost that would have to be negotiated and put in on top of the transaction. So yeah, you can certainly do that. And that's I'm comfortable with that. I just can't I can't serve two masters, so to speak. That's just not allowed in our industry.
And then even though you're serving one master, which is the developer, are the developer's interests aligned with the BRA's interest and the city's interest? It seems like they may diverge if the developer just wants to be paid out, period. That, you know, they may instruct you, and it may be your duty to go ahead and say, this might not be the best deal, but it's the most certain deal. Let's go with it because you guys want to be paid out. So I think the BRA should know that if they want their own financial advisor, we're going to have to pay extra for it. And we just talked about limiting expenses. So you see the conundrum that we're in. So what's the pleasure of the BRA? As an officer, I'm comfortable. I'd be more comfortable having a financial advisor.
I agree.
Can we possibly get a financial advisor, Tom Fehrenbach, to advise in that period of time? Is that possible for us to do?
I'm not certain. I think we'd need to make some calls and probably put a quick RFP together and try to get some folks interested in short order. What would the time frame be to when a deal might come together and you'd have the need for representation on the BRA side to review something?
We're assuming that you're going to have some type of term sheet here within 6 weeks, maybe 8 at the latest. And so I don't know what your timing is for your board to do an RFP and get someone engaged.
So we can certainly get someone engaged in that period of time. I guess my question would be for the city attorney as to whether that would be part and parcel to this action item, or whether we'd need to schedule a new board meeting because it may be a new item for consideration.
And would we have to do an RFP?
That would be a function of the expected costs, and given that I think it would probably certainly be over $20,000, I think it's probably likely that we would have the need to go to RFP for such services.
Brian and Miller Canfield, is it common that you see a financial advisor for the Brownfield authorities? Can you give us some help on this?
Sure.
What's your experience?
Yeah. So on the Red Cedar transaction, I actually served as the municipal advisor representing the Lansing Brownfield. The developer had their own financial advisor on that transaction. So it is customary, or it could be done. It was just that the city of Lansing wanted to have representation. They felt that was necessary. And I guess the only question I have here is whether or not there's any authorization within the resolution that gives that to go ahead and issue this RFP and do this. But I'm going to defer to Miller Canfield. I was trying to read through it real quick. If you're already authorized to do it.
Can Miller Canfield speak to that?
I don't think we contemplated I mean, we could certainly just, you could amend the resolution, or we could just have the understanding that you're going to have a financial advisor representing you, and we'll put it in as a cost issuance. I don't know.
Mr. Yaden, is it appropriate to give that direction today, or do we need to have that come back to the board?
You can do it today as part of an amendment to the resolution that's just been adopted. Just reconsider the resolution and amend it in that fashion.
So should I make a motion now to reconsider the resolution and to add in that the city will procure the services of a financial advisor, the BRA will secure the services of a financial advisor to assist us in advising on the transaction?
Yep.
And have it charged as a cost of issuance.
Exactly.
And have it charged to the cost of issuance.
Yep, that would work.
So George has offered a reconsideration of the passage of the resolution with an amendment to include a financial advisor, and if I'm not mistaken, Jim Kroom supported that with the cost to be at the cost of issuance. Any other comments? Okay, can we go ahead and then take that vote?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mayor Pro Tem Stevens?
Sorry, the clarification, this is on the financial advisor or the resolution as a whole with the financial advisor?
The motion is to reconsider the vote by which the resolution passed and add an amendment to include a financial advisor.
All right. And yes.
Mr. Kroom,
Yes.
Dewan,
Yes.
Hackney, Hackney, one more time, please.
Yes.
Luke?
Thank you, sir. Kruger,
Yes.
Lahanis,
Yes.
Levinson,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Motion is carried 8-0.
Thank you. All right. I appreciate everyone's time.
Peter,
On
one
this
more
item.
clarification, Jim Kroom.
Yes, Jim.
So with the officers approving under this resolution, is it also the case that we have decided now to pay the 822, in other words, to fold the developer's 822 into the reissued bond? I think that's what we've decided by approving these resolutions, so that you and I and the officers will not be making that decision. That's already included as the will of the BRA. Is that everyone's understanding?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other comments that, Adam? You've pulled up the agenda.
Moving on.
So, yeah, okay. So I appreciate everyone's comment. I appreciate the expertise and the participants in the meeting today. Is there any communication from staff?
Just very briefly, I wanted to report that we received back the BEA for the Evergreen properties. There is a small issue related to potential asbestos, and so we will be queuing up an additional request for access to the grant, and we'll likely be bringing that back for approval at the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any board members?
Something?
Yes, please.
Could I bring up a point of order? With regard to the last comment Mr. Kroom made about rolling in the developer's 825, I don't know that that was clear as part of that motion. Is that in the resolution itself that was approved?
To my knowledge, it is not part of that. It's more, I think, kind of telegraphing that to the officers, that there's the expectation that will be in the final bond documents that they'll be expected to sign. So if you need something more formal than that, then we should probably address that.
Well, one of my concerns is that I'm not sure that we don't need an amendment to the development agreement to do that. And
Smith has his hands raised. Smith can respond.
I can't see Tom, if you could take down the agenda. Who wishes to speak? Oh, Jared, go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you. Tom, it's Jared. Couple of things. That you're right. The development agreement certainly laid out a plan with respect to, or at least a concept that those fees would be paid at the end. But I'd also offer that provision is not part of the bond transaction. As an additional example, when we fully drew down the bonds upon their issuance and escrowed them instead of using a drawdown structure, that was also a slight deviation. And then I obviously want to defer to Mr. Danhoff, but I do believe the resolution, we specifically requested the additional provision that that 822 be included as an eligible use of bond proceeds. So at least I think we can button up the authorizing resolution question with respect to the 822. And then obviously Tom raises the MDA question, which as it really was a development agreement that lasted until completion of the project. So I invite everyone to check the termination provisions of that agreement as well. That oversees completion through certificate of occupancy, which we all had to abide by and operate under. Now, obviously, you're right. Our proposal today is to wrap in those fees for a savings to the city because there's a benefit there. We acknowledge that as drafted, the MDA contemplated those costs coming at the end.
So are you saying that the conflict between the development agreement and the resolution just authorized by the BRA, the BRA resolution is going to control that and you don't need to amend MDA? Is that your position?
Obviously I would want you to agree, but the MDA sort of, it lays out our handshakes and all the things we agreed to, but it also terminated by operation as soon as we had occupancy authorized by the city.
Yeah, and in paragraph 1 of the resolution was adopted is the concept of reimbursing additional costs related to the project. That was meant to cover the 822. That's specific, including paragraph 1. So that was our intent.
Okay, so that is in the resolution then?
Yeah.
Bill? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to make sure we were.
That's why I appreciate the people understanding, whoever raised that point, that it is in there and it's intended to be in there.
Okay.
Tom Yaden, any additional comments on that subject?
No, I just wanted to make sure it was in there, and bond counsel agreed that it was in there, so I'm comfortable with that then.
Okay. Steve Willoughby, I saw your hand raised.
The conversation clarified it. They addressed it.
All right, great. Very good. Any board member comments or announcements? Hearing none, motion to adjourn would be in order.
Moved.
It's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye.
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 Meeting's adjourned. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Peter. Bye.
Thank you.